I remember how to do this.
It's this one, right, Miss Thorpe?
Let's find this page.
What one? Oh, this one.
So I cannot hear anyone else's voices unless you're asking me a question, and you raise your hand. You do that. Alright, so for these types of questions, they're asking you to find an additional equation, so they give you one already, but that's not your answer. They want you to find an equation that is parallel to that equation. So in order to do that, you need to find what would the slope be of your new equation. M is your slope, but what would your slope be of your new equation if it's parallel to this? -4. Because for parallel lines, they have to have the same slope. So our new slope is actually going to be the same slope. Christine, do you have these? So once we have our new slope, which is the same in this case, we have x, we have y, we have m. Now we're going to put it into y equals mx plus b. So 3 equals -4 times -1 plus b. Now don't get confused and start putting this equation in, because once we get the slope from this, we're not using anything else from it. We're not using that equation, that y-intercept. We just need it for the slope, and that's it. So this would be 3 equals 4 plus b. What would b be? It is a y-intercept, but what would the value be? -1. So now we have our slope, we have our y-intercept. What's our equation?
Y equals
Wow.
-1.
So it's slope x plus our y-intercept, or
So
minus
y equals 4x
-4x
or -4x plus -1.
minus 1.
This is to do what? This is to do what?
This equation is parallel to this one. So we found a new equation that's parallel to the first one. So that's what it's called.
Yes, sir.
So for the most part, this process is the same, but there are slight differences. Like this one is not in slope-intercept form. So we need to solve it first. We need to get this in slope-intercept form first by doing what? Subtracting x on both sides. And then, Christina.
What exactly is the test on?
Writing equations of lines. Writing equations of lines with parallel and perpendicular lines.
When will we, I'm just curious ahead of time, so when will we be done with graphs?
Never. It's a year-long process. What's the next step? Divide each piece by -3. So when we divide this by -3, the negatives are going to cancel. When we divide this by -3, it's just -3. That is not your answer, though. All that did was put it in slope-intercept form, so it was like number 1. So now we can find our slope. What would our slope of our new line be if it's parallel? 1/3. So now again, we have m, we have x, we have y. We need to find b.
So it would be
-1 equals 1/3 times 3 plus b. 1/3 times 3 is, which is 1. When we subtract 1 to both sides, what is b?
0?
It's not 0. -2. So you're subtracting 1 on both sides to get -2. What's your equation?
Y equals 1 over 3 times.
-2.
Hold on. Why are you subtracting -1?
Because
Oh.
oh, yo, I had a.
Nathaniel.
Where did you get
the -1 for y?
Oh, from this order pair. Yes.
So the second one's always y. Wait, yeah.
Yes. X, Y. So for these types of problems, you really need to read the directions. Make sure you are reading the directions, following. If it says parallel, do that. If it says perpendicular, do that. If you get a question like this, but it's asking for parallel, just use the same slope, do this process. But if you get a question like these, you need to solve this and then find your slope and do this process. So there's an added step in there. Do you have questions on those two before we do the next two?
Hold on.
Soren, I need your head up.
What is that? -1, and then what is that? Is this going to be another line or like 2?
Just remember.
Thank you.
Now, notice that these say perpendicular lines, so you have to remember what perpendicular lines have. What about their slopes? So if we have something like this, our first step is to still find what would our new slope be, but you have to remember that it's perpendicular now. What do we know about perpendicular slopes? They're negative reciprocal. So what would our new slope be? Negative 1/2.
Why is it -1/2?
So that means one is positive, one is negative, and you're taking this number and flipping it. So this is really over 1. So if you flip it, it's 1/2. So that's your first step. Find your new slope, but you need to change it completely. It's not just the same like it was for parallel lines. But once you have this, you have M, you have X, you have Y. Now it's the same process. Put those back in, solve for B.
Can you repeat how you did that again?
What is the perpendicular slope of 2?
0
Negative 1/2. The negative reciprocal. You have to flip the whole thing. That's it. So 3 equals negative 1/2 times 4 plus B. We need to solve for B. So again, just like with our parallel lines, once we have that slope, we're not using that y-intercept, we're not touching that equation, we just needed this slope to find our new slope. Negative 1/2 times 4 is what? -2. So if we're adding 2 to both sides, what's B?
5.
5. So what's our equation now? Negative 1/2 x
Plus 5.
plus 5.
Oh, that's what I meant.
So you're no longer using this slope, you're using the new slope we found, and then our y-intercept. Yes. Add 2 to both sides.
Where did we get
3 was right here, 4 was right here, negative 1/2 is your slope.
Wait, so you just said when the negative sign?
You need to add it to both sides. Do the opposite to solve it. So the process is basically the same. You just have to remember to actually change your slope in the beginning. But if you get problems like this, just like the ones we did with the parallel, you need to solve it first. That's still step one, no matter which type of problem it is. Solve it for y first. How would we get this equal to y? Not subtract x.
Plus add x.
Add x. So y equals x minus 2.
Is your y backwards than x?
This one should have been an x. But again, that's not your answer. That's just first step.
Why does algebra have to be so long?
I didn't create it. I don't know.
So n would just be x. Or wait, no, sorry. N would just be -1.
N would be -1. Because the negative reciprocal of 1 is
Negative.
-1/1. Now we have our new slope. Now we can put those back into our equation. So -2 equals -1 times -3 plus b. This would be -2 equals 3 plus b. What would be b?
-5.
-5. So what's our equation? Y
-1.
or -x minus 5. Either one. You don't need the one, but you can put it.
So, you don't multiply, you add.
Right here.
Yeah.
We did multiply, and then we had to get rid of 3 by subtraction. So multiply first to combine those two, but then add or subtract if it's positive or negative.
I think you close the door.
I want you to go ahead and do all of the evens. We'll come back and we'll check it. And then we'll talk through some of the others and then do the review. So you have 15 minutes to work through those 4 problems. You may not even need that entire time. So if you didn't get to these and you're just writing them down, that will not help you for your test Friday. So 1 should have been -4x minus 1. I'm sorry, we did that one together. I should just be reading these. 2 was 1/4 x minus 2. 4 was -5 x minus 2. 6 was -4/3 x plus 1. Excuse me, and 8 was -x plus 1.
I'm confused.
I can't write. Grab another one.
I'm a little confused on number 6.
How to get what?
I got something really weird.
So did you change your slope?
No, my slope is, kind of like this.
Yes. So that's your problem. Okay.
Maybe?
Stop flipping the water. So make sure you are reading the directions very carefully. If it says parallel, you don't need to change the slope. If it says perpendicular, you have to change your slope, or otherwise your answer is wrong.
Can we go back to number 2?
Yes, sir. Is this anyone's code? black coat up here?
It's black.
Just
Oh, I
one.
would buy my
Just one. It's actually
Can I just go to the bathroom?
Do we have any other questions on these four? Yes, you think.
How do we get 2 add B for number 1?
For number one,
I mean, for number 2. Number 2.
it should be -2 for B.
So, I got 4 and 1 4. So,
So when you multiplied those two, you got 1. And then when you subtracted that, you got -2. You should have got -2. -1 minus 1 is -2.
okay.
Did you find out?
So I think I did it wrong.
Be quiet.
Okay, yeah, I understand that it's wrong.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah. What was your question about 8, Jay? Zara, what was your question? Can you please play the blood shot? Alright. The last page in this is just more practice on this, and I do want you to practice this. So I'm going to give you 15 minutes to do as many of these that you can. What I would suggest is do one of each type. One of these type of parallel, one of these type of parallel, one of these type of perpendicular, and then one of these type. And then if you have time, go back and do the others.
And that's for you?
This is the stuff we just did.
Oh, okay. I thought
So you have 15 minutes to do as many of these as you can. We will go over these, and then we're going to do the review. I'm going to read through all of them, and then if we need to go over any, we will. For number 1, the equation was -x plus 1 or -1x plus 1. Either one was fine. 2 was 1/2 x minus 3. 3 was -2/5 x minus 3. 4 was x plus 4 or 1x plus 4.
I got the one that I did right.
Oh, because I was supposed to divide. I didn't know.
4.
I still got it right. I did divide. I did it right. I just didn't divide it inside.
God bless you.
So you would have had to subtract. You would have to subtract and divide. So you should have gotten a fraction for your. So -4 divided by 2 is -4 divided by 2. Is it negative? Do we have questions on those 4?
No, Miss Thor.
For 5, you should have got -1/2 x plus 1. I did that right. 6 was -4/3 x plus 1. 7 was -4x plus 3. And 8 was 1/2 x plus 3. All 3 was -2/5 x minus 3. Do we have questions on those 4?
Do we have, wait, we were supposed to do like 4, so one of each side.
Do more if you could. Okay. So everyone should have gotten a review sheet. Find that. We're going to do some of them. So there's gonna be two objectives on the test. Can you write the equations of lines? And then can you write the equations of lines for parallel and perpendicular lines? So if you do well in the first part, this second part is just added extra steps. So you should get at least some of those.
Where's the lines for 2 and 6?
So it's a straight line, and then
They're
six
both-
push dots.
They're both straight lines.
But which is which?
You can't even see that.
I mean, you just have to do the
They're both straight lines. Alright, we're gonna do some from each section. So which two do we want to do in this section?
One.
So we can do 1 and 2. We're not doing both of those. So for any question that has a slant in whatever direction that goes, you need to find your slope and your y-intercept. What's your y-intercept in number 1?
Zero.
0. And then you need to pick another point that goes through 2 lines exactly so that you could count your slope. -3.
One.
-3.
-3, 2.
-3, 2 works.
Negative.
There's multiple others. So find 2 points that cross lines exactly and count your slope. So in this case, from -3, 2, I'm sorry, that should be. No, that's right.
Or -2.
It is -2, 2.
It's left 3 down. Or right 3 down.
It's less. She meant -2. Oh. So you're going down 2 and right 2. So what's your slope?
-1.
-1. We already know our y-intercept is 0, so y equals -1x. You can add plus 0, you don't need it. Or -x, add plus 0, but you don't need it. Your slope. Simplify this, you get -1. Anytime you have a horizontal or vertical straight line like 2 and 6, you need to remember Hoy-Bucks. So for number 2, is that a horizontal or a vertical line?
Vertical.
It's a vertical line. So that means this is going to be an x equals. Well, what does x equal? That is the answer.
Slight work.
So realize what type of line this is going to be. Is it x equals or y equals, and then find the number.
No, don't move it.
You should be writing as we go along. Now we're going to do 2 in the next section. Pick 2 of them.
9 and 15.
Okay. And they're numbered very badly. I don't know why. 4, this one. So this is -5, 0. And then 4/5. And then this is 1, -2.
Are these answers what I learned?
Yes. Since the beginning of the unit. So for these, you're given M, X, and Y. You need to find B. Same process that we've been doing. So 0 equals 4/5. Your X is -5 plus B. What's 4/5 times -5?
On
negative 4? Yes. So if we add 4 to both sides, what's b? Positive 4. What's our equation here? X plus 4. Don't forget your x's. But yes, that is your equation. The 4/5. It was given to you. For number 15, anytime you have slope undefined or slope 0, use Hoy bucks. That should be an X.
Please.
So for 15, we're looking for a slope of 0. Is that going to be x equals or y equals? It's going to be y equals. So remember that these two tell you if it's 0 or undefined. So it's going to be a y equals. Well, what does y equal in your order pair?
Negative 2.
Negative 2. That's it.
That was slight work. I'm a math genie.
I know it's bathroom.
Jay, Mom, should keep your eyes up here. Yes.
I'm a math genie. Do you know that?
For this section, you're doing that, but there's an added step. So we're going to do 2 of these. Which 2 would you like to do?
How about 19?
19 and 7. As we're saying, either one of these is fine. They're about the same. Let's actually do this one though.
The other one.
Thank you. So with these, you need to find your slope and your y-intercept. So that means you need to remember this. Because you have to find your slope first, then you need to find your y-intercept. But if you find the wrong slope, your answer is wrong. Because you found the wrong slope to find the wrong y-intercept to find the wrong equation. So make sure you have the right slope first. So for 18, I'm going to go through and label them. And then put them in that format. 2 minus 0 over negative 3, minus negative 4. Negative 3 minus negative 4 is what? It's 1. So your slope is really 2. So now we can choose either one of those points to solve for b. Does not matter which one. I would suggest anything with a 0 because it makes your life a little bit easier.
0.
So if we're using this point, 0 is y, your slope is 2, your x is negative 4, and you're solving for b.
How does that make your life easier?
You don't have to do as many steps. Yes. So when you move 8 over, b equals 8. What's your equation for this line?
17.
For 18.
Oh, it would be y 2 times. Wait.
X plus 8.
Sorry.
So find your slope, find your y-intercept, find your equation. For 19, same thing. Find your slope. So negative 3 minus 3 over 0 minus 0. When you see questions like this that have the same number, like 0 in both of your x's or 0 in both of your y's, that's going to be an undefined or 0 slope. Because this is going to be negative 6. This is going to be 0. Anything over 0 is undefined. So this has an undefined slope. That means it's going to be what type of equation? In Hoy-Bucks, what type of equation would this be?
X.
X. Now, if you're looking at these ordered pairs, what is your value of x? 0. So it looked more complicated than it really was.
How do you set up the lower equation?
The y equals mx plus b.
Like how do you know which one's y?
You pick a point, be quiet. Pick one of these points, and then you have x and y, and you solve for m already.
Okay.
So that is your objective on writing equations of lines. And then you have an objective on writing equations of lines that are parallel and perpendicular. Yes. Yes. So for this section, this entire section, I need you to read very carefully. Be very, very careful that you're reading. Don't assume that something is going to be parallel because the last one was parallel. Don't assume that something's going to be perpendicular because the last one was perpendicular. Read. So for this one, it's asking you to find the slope of a line that's parallel and the slope of a line that's perpendicular. All that means is you need to find the slope that's parallel and the slope that's perpendicular. And you're not finding a whole nother equation for both. So I'm just going to write this side note up here. You don't have to write it, but you can. For parallel lines, we know what about the slopes and y-intercepts?
Are the same.
Same slopes. Y-intercepts are different. So remember that that is the symbol for parallel lines. I'm just going to use that to shorthand this. You can write out the word parallel or use the symbol. I don't care. For perpendicular, what do we know about those slopes?
Negative reciprocals.
Negative reciprocals. Sorry, were you going to answer that? I'm sorry. Slopes are negative reciprocals. And the y-intercepts don't matter. They could be the same, they could be different, it doesn't matter. So if you're given these type of questions where you need to find the slope, if it's in slope-intercept form, it's like 1, you could find your slope, no problem. If it's not in slope-intercept form or it's close, be careful that you're looking at the slope, not the y-intercept. But if it's not in slope-intercept form at all, you need to solve first. So for this one, number 3 is almost in slope-intercept form, but we need to get it all the way. So how would we do that?
We'd have to, yeah, we have to
divide. You can still say it. So y equals 3/2 x minus 4. So if we were looking for the slope that is parallel to this one, what would our slope be?
It would still be 3/2.
It would still be 3/2. So I'm going to write this as, for parallel lines, our slope would be 3/2. What would our slope be if it was perpendicular? Negative, not 3/2, but 2/3.
Oh, so what you're doing is you're finding the parallel and the perpendicular
Slope
slope.
of both.
Okay. Okay.
But it may not ask that specifically. Make sure you're reading the directions. If it says equation, you need the whole thing. But if it just wants slope, you just need the slope. If you put extra, that's too much. For the next section, it's just asking whether these are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. I'll go back. So we're going to do 7. So in order to tell if these are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, you need to solve them. Now, you may be able to see if they have the same numbers, but I wouldn't say that they're parallel or perpendicular just by looking at if they have the same numbers, because it could change. In this case, when we subtract x, they're both negative, so it doesn't change, but it could, so don't assume. So when we're solving this, we'd have to subtract x to both. So y equals negative x plus 5, and y equals negative x minus 10. Are these parallel, perpendicular, or neither?
Parallel.
Parallel. I would know that.
Because the slopes are the same.
Because the slopes are the same. Yes, Jay.
Line to
That's the symbol for parallel lines. These two are asking the same thing, except one is asking for parallel, one is asking for perpendicular. This is exactly what we were just doing, those practice problems. The exact same thing. So we're going to do one of each. So for this one, it's asking for a new equation that is parallel to the given. So that means our first step, it's already in slope-intercept form. We need to find what would our slope of our new line be. What would that be? 2. Because they're parallel, they have to be the same. After you find that slope, you have an x, you have a y, you have an m, find b. So 2 equals 2 times 4 plus b. 2 equals 8 plus b. What is b? Negative 6. What is our equation then?
it would be
Y
equals
plus
2x minus
6. But if you have these types of equations and it's not solved for y, or if it's not in slope-intercept form, you have to do that first, no matter which type it is. So for this equation, How would we solve this for y or get it back into slope intercept form? Subtract 3x from both sides. So 5y equals negative 3x plus 7. And then
Divide.
each by 5. So y equals negative 3/5 x plus 7/5. Remember that some of these you'll get decimals as your y-intercept, and that's okay. That's not your answer though. What would our next step be? You have to make the slope perpendicular. So what would our new slope be?
It would be 5 over negative.
Oh, yeah.
So it would just be 5/3. So be very careful with that also. If it's already negative, don't make it negative again. You'll get the wrong answer. Now we have x, y, and m. We need to find b. So this would be 5 equals 5 over 3 times 2 plus b. What would 5 over 3 times 2 be?
Negative 3. Oh, wait.
Leave it as a fraction. And it wouldn't be negative. Over 3. Remember, you're just multiplying across, so this is really over 1. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 1 is 3. Now, how would we solve this for b? Subtract what? Subtracting 10 over 3 to both sides. So you guys can do that in your calculator. I'm going to do that by hand. What's b? 5 over 3. So what's our equation? It has to be 5 over 3. So we're not looking at that one. We're looking at our new one. So this one was a weird one that had the same slope and y-intercept. That happens. And they were both fractions. That happens.
What would it look like in a
5 over 3 is 1 2/3. So it would be a decimal y-intercept. And then you could still do your slope. It would just be off of the points.
I'm gonna put this in your question for X.
Now, this last section, it says find the value of a. So you are given 2 different equations, and you need to find the value of a if it's perpendicular to the second equation. So that means if this is not in slope-intercept form, we need to solve it and then find the slope that would be perpendicular to it. So if we solve this equation, we would be dividing by 2. So that would be our second equation. What value could we make a to make it perpendicular to the second equation? So what would that reciprocal be? It would be negative 2/3. That's all it's asking you to find. The slope, the new slope. What should A be if it's perpendicular? But you have to solve the other one first. So for the rest of class, I want you to work through the other problems. If you finish, come show me. If you finish and still have time and would like to do Khan Academy, that's fine. If you have questions on anything in this, anything in the notes, or anything on Khan Academy, you need to come see me tomorrow morning, Friday morning, or tomorrow after school. If you have questions or need help with Khan Academy, you need to come see me tomorrow after school. If you would like extra practice on the parallel and perpendicular lines, there are extra practice sheets up here. But work on the review first. So work on the review first, and then you may grab extra practice, work on Khan Academy.